This class concerns organisational change, and it starts with a very simple question. What is change? Well, change has been described as a movement between some discrete and rather fixed states. In other words, when you move from one state to a different state, you have changed something. When you've moved from one design to another design, you have changed something. So it's simply moving between different states. So we can go on from here to say that organisational change is a maker of being in one state at one time and state 2 at a different time. So it's simply moving between two states. All organisations are subject to change. Like it or not, no organisation can stay the same forever, according to Valerie Stewart. So organisations are constantly evolving, constantly changing. We don't get companies and organisations fixed for all time. We get innovations, new technologies, new ways of doing things, new machinery, new plant, new logistical systems, new office systems, and so on. So we are changing, or they are changing, the system. Change is the very essence of business growth. It's inevitable and unavoidable. Change has been with us right from the start of our existence on the planet. We have changed things. We have changed the way we've lived. We've changed the way we produce. We've changed society. We've changed the products that we buy. So change has been around right from the start. Change can be internal or external. It can be planned or unplanned. Organisations cannot always control their environment against changes in politics, society, the economy, or technology. So much of the change in business may come from outside. It may be changes in government policy, taxation, or legislation governing pollution, or legislation governing employment. Or it could be changes in society, tastes, so that products that were acceptable in one time period are not acceptable in a different time period. So change is, if you like, pushed onto the organisation. So if companies can't control the changes, they must adjust to them. There's no choice. So change can be forced on companies. Now, there's a very, very famous book here by Huginski and Buchanan. They've identified 4 features of change in organisations. First of all, the triggers. Change is a result of internal or external pressures. So something is causing change, and this they called the trigger. Something is causing it to move from one state to the next. Second, we have interdependencies. Change occurs in one department of an organisation due to pressures in another department. This is quite commonplace. It could be that changes in distribution or distribution methods leads to a change in packaging, leads to a change in production, leads to a change in the way items are produced. You can trace it all the way back, perhaps. Changes in one department within a business may affect other departments. It's as simple as that. Number 3 is conflicts and frustrations. The aims of the managers may not meet those of the employees, and this results in conflict. Not only does this create pressure to change, but also resistance to change. We're dealing with people, and people have aspirations and feelings and emotions, and if a situation arises where the managers wish to implement some change, it may be resisted by the workers for a variety of reasons, and we'll look at this in later videos. But whatever the reason, there can be conflicts and frustrations derived out of proposed changes. And finally, time lags. There are often time differences in adapting to change by different people or departments. The fact that change happens doesn't mean that everybody changes instantaneously. Some people resist it. Some people introduce it at a slower pace. So it's a feature of change that it does not happen perhaps immediately in all departments. Now, the types of change, it can take different forms in different situations and in different organisations. So change is not homogeneous, it's not all the same. Carol O'Connor suggests that there are 3 different forms of change. First of all, there are routine changes. These changes are intended to be part of routine within the organisation. In fact, some changes are built in to the whole production plan. That's the idea, to take raw materials and change it into a final product. And part of that could be to change the way the organisation is and perhaps renew itself periodically. The workforce will be concerned if it doesn't happen. For example, changes in the business at certain peak times, perhaps during the Christmas or the New Year sales times in retailing, or perhaps changes in the business in the postal service coming up to Christmas when more workers are required. That's a matter of routine. Second, improvement involves change which enhances the performance of an organisation by building on current activities. So, we're familiar with technology and the increasing pace of change in technology as applied in business. The changes that are implemented should be improvements. They should lead to greater efficiency. They should lead to greater accuracy and a better experience for the consumer and the producer, so that the changes are improvements. They should be innovative. Changes sometimes introduce quite radical or radically different ways of doing things, of making the product. Sometimes they're very small changes. But one of the driving forces for change is innovation, to enable the producer to bring a new method into play which itself will improve the product or improve efficiency, improve profitability, or give the workers a better working environment or a better working experience. So innovation is a driving force for change. The problem is that the managers must be able to recognize which type of change they are dealing with and how it should be managed successfully. So there is a big element of communications involved here If the change is planned, it should be communicated right throughout the organisation so everyone understands it. Um, if it happens without effective communications, it can lead to issues of industrial relations or employee relations, or it could be some issue dealing with the internalisation, the understanding of the change and its implementation. Now, Hajinski and Buchanan have identified three major triggers for change. To deal with developments in the external world, such as changes in customer tastes, competitors' activities and suppliers' activities, political changes, social changes, economic changes, and technological changes. In other words, the organisation does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in the world, and the world is changing. And therefore, what's happening in society, what's happening as a result of political pressure, what's happening as a result of what competitors are doing, or international trade, all of these impact on the business, which must respond. And it responds by changing its practices to accommodate what's happening outside. There are also internal developments, changes to the workforce's attitude, motives, behaviour, knowledge, skills, relationships. Insofar as companies employ people, people are people. People want certain aspirations, they have certain requirements at work, health and safety, a nice working environment, perhaps. They want rewards, they want updating in terms of skills, they want to be involved, and they want to be spoken to. They want what they're doing explained to them so that they're better able to engage in the process. And that can lead to, again, change. Trying to deal with the developments before they occur. It's always an issue within business. We can't see the future. According to one famous economist, the future is unknowable. We can't know it. But managers always try to factor in what they believe is going to happen in the future. And they try to ensure the continuance of the business in the light of an adverse future. If something bad is going to happen in the future, they try to build in protections now, so that they're trying to anticipate what's happening in the future. If something good is going to happen in the future, they factor that in as well. Now, Valerie Stewart, whom we mentioned earlier, cites 7 reasons which lead to change. Competition. Well, the company perhaps have competitors. The competitors are not standing still. They're innovating, they're changing, they're flexing with the fashion, the tastes in the market. So to survive, the company must keep an eye on the competitors. It's also the case that the country is changing. Political change is happening all the time. What consumers want and the protection that consumers get, the buying trends, the fashions, these affect the business. The political change here could be also in terms of well, it's really like economic change, but politically, the government has got some sort of say in the regulation of the interest rates. It's the Bank of England in the case of the UK. So central banks control it, and the government has got some say or influence over that, generally speaking. But they also can regulate the amount of consumer credit, with pressure on the banks. So it's an economic change, but it's political as well. So You can call it political change or economic change. It really doesn't matter. Economic change itself, well, these include increasing costs of products. For example, increasing price of oil may lead companies to switch to different power sources, perhaps electric or gas, if possible. So, one way or the other, as the price of inputs in the business changes, or perhaps increases, the business has an incentive to look for changes that will ameliorate the impact of those increases. Social changes, well, over a long period of time, there's been a greater involvement of females at work, which is right and proper. It's half the workforce. It's half the country. And the changes that has brought about over the last probably 50 years have been immense. New talent, new experiences, new skills coming into the workforce, a complete refreshing of the workforce. So there have been attitudes of change, and the population distribution has changed as well. So there are demographic factors that can lead to changes in the business. Technological change. These are normally associated with computing and information technology and the rapid response that businesses have towards the consumer requirements, towards the market. And with these changes as they've come forward, the internet, etc., these are putting pressure on businesses to change as well. There are other areas of change that we could consider which are much more long run, fundamental attitudes in society. I haven't given it as a point here, but there are fundamental changes, perhaps religious changes or societal changes, the way we behave, the way we act, communication systems, transportation, greater contact with different cultures, and international trade and outsourcing. So all of these have brought about the need for change as well. So the slide says 7. I'm itemizing 6. The other ones are dealt with in other videos, but essentially it boils down to changes in world trade patterns, outsourcing, and the whole shift in distribution, and a greater understanding of the need to recognize cultural identities and cultural differences. So there are the 7. There's the 6 there, and the final one, which is the more global issue. Now there are other reasons for change. The government, it could make some product legal or illegal. It could introduce new legislation, regulations. It could influence the interest rates, as we said earlier. There are also new pressures, for example, ecological pressures. There is now more understanding of our impact on climate and on the planet on which we live. And companies must take this into account in their production systems. There's also what we call a loss of legitimacy. Sometimes organizations simply are not required. Companies that on organizations that were important perhaps 100, 200 years ago are no longer important. And if you check back on economic history, there have been many companies like this. The East India Company was once extremely important in the City of London. That's now gone. There was also quite a lot of power gathered by tobacco companies, which for health reasons and social reasons and so on are no longer. So the legitimacy of the business, the reason why the business exists, perhaps, has been taken away. So for a company to survive, it must be able to identify and respond to changes. Now, the forces for change which are external to the business, according to Carl O'Connor. Well, competition, that's outside the business. We've already mentioned it. Companies are not standing still waiting for each other to go first. They're trying to beat each other. It's competition. It's survival of the fittest. There are social values, which are outside. These are the products of health, education, social class, ethics, beliefs, religious values, whatever. And these are impacting also on the business. And in fact, some of these may be changing over time. Education may be becoming better, the environment, greater understanding of our impact on the planet. So it's an external force. I've already mentioned technology earlier. Technology is extremely important. Not just the fact that there are new production machinery, but our understanding of the way in which production should take place. Our understanding of plant design or office design, all designed itself to generate greater efficiency. Consumer needs. It's not a question of buy it and go away. It's a question of buy it and be satisfied. And businesses, through their marketing departments, are placing more emphasis on consumer satisfaction. And there is customer relations management, and there is greater contact with the customer and feedback from customers regarding the product, the price, its quality, its attributes, its general attributes. So that's important. And again, it's an external factor. And as I said, some of these are similar to the ones we mentioned in the context of Valerie Stewart earlier. Now let's briefly look at the people involved in change. Well, there are a number of people or groups of people who are involved or affected by change. Johnson and Scholes, two extremely famous writers in the area mostly of strategy, identify some of these groups and explain their roles in the change process. For a start, there's the change agent. This is the individual or group that affects strategic change in an organization. The change agent is the person or the group who initiate the change, who argue for the change, who demonstrate its advantages, who take it on board to implement the change and get it through and get it working. These are the champions of change, the agents of change. And the change agent must possess characteristics to manage the change. Peters and Waterman's discussion, how change agents have to handle two conflicting management styles at the same time. Well, if you think about it, there is the existing management style, and then there is the management style required after the change has taken place. So that's different. For example, they have to take into account the future of the organization, while at the same time making things happen in the present. So they're looking to handle the situation right now, but also design in changes which will affect people, managers, the company's perception from the outside. They are going to deal with that also. So they have two parts, the present and the future. They also need to improve performance by changing the old methods. And the old methods could damage the success of change. Other people involved in change are the middle managers. These are the people who oversee the change and try to implement it smoothly without any problems. It's done by making sure that there are sufficient resources, sufficient people are performing, and these are the people who implement the change. The change is handed down from the change agents, who's been approved by senior management. It's a design, it's given to the middle managers, and they implement it. They deliver it. Other organisational members, even people like consumers, workers at the lower end of the managerial chain also have a say in, also have to be taken on board. They need to understand the reason for the change. They need to understand their role in the change, and how it's going to affect them in the future, so as to ensure that they are still motivated and still aiming to participate fully in the life of the business. It's also the case that external shareholders have to understand the business. These are ultimately the owners of the business, and for changes to the business to be effective and for the shareholders to agree may require quite a lot of explanation, quite a lot of contact between the owners, the shareholders, and the management. And finally, there are others, the outsiders, the consultants. The consultants who might have an input in designing the change and selling the change to all of the stakeholders, the workers, the middle management, the lower management, and the shareholders, and the press, and the public, and the consumers. So perhaps consultants are the people who are required to put the full package together so that everyone understands where the business is going. There's quite a lot in this class. I suggest, as you work your way through it for the second time, you stop it periodically and make notes and see where it goes from there. I think that really concludes the class, so let's leave it at that, and thank you for watching.